Honestly, y'all, there were a lot of choices for puns for Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't any. I just want to take a moment to say we're going like super deep on spoilers. So if you have not seen Rise of Skywalker, turn this off right now. Unless you don't care.
Let's move away from lies and fears. Perhaps it's time to leave. Free from how you look or what they say. Like a lion runs wild through the wilderness. Free from showing off or living fake. The eagles flying high, dancing with the air. There's breath in your lungs to breathe. Say, God, take this mask away. You see, he won't let you stay. Living in hollow days.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of ShatterCast, where we are going to discuss the Rise of Skywalker, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. There really isn't much ugly. Have you seen Kylo Ren?
I saw him in the
No
movie.
comment.
I don't know what you're insinuating there, Brett. What are you insinuating there, buddy? What are the insinuations?
Y'all are ridiculous. Rise of Skywalker was amazing.
It was pretty good.
It was pretty good.
It was amazing.
Hannah, you have been quiet. What are your thoughts on the Rise of Skywalker?
I quite enjoyed it.
Good.
Amazing.
All right, well, that wraps it up. There you go. I don't know what else to say about that.
The most efficient podcast we have ever hosted. Yeah, I mean, let's just start with the positives. What did you like? What did you guys like about it?
I'll dive into it. So I would give it 8 out of 10. I thought it was good. Positives. I thought that they wrapped up the trilogy okay. I felt like J.J. Abrams, who came back to direct Episode 9, some of the issues that people had with Episode 8, he made a point to address directly. So I thought that was interesting. I like that they brought Han Solo back a little bit for a little flash with his little kid. That was cool.
Yeah.
Nice little scene there. I thought the set pieces are usually pretty good in Star Wars, so cool things there. I'm glad they finally got Lando in the movie.
Right.
Good job. Welcome back, Lando. Yeah, and I like...
Any relation to Mando?
Oh my goodness. See our other segment. I like the story arcs of Kylo Ren and Rey.
Mm-hmm.
Their struggle with, do I accept the dark side, light side, or whatever, I thought made for some interesting dynamics. And not everyone liked it, but I kind of liked their forced bond where they could see each other from distance and how they were doing with that and how that played out with some of the fighting scenes. How they
Full spoilers, where Kylo Ren pulled the lightsaber from behind his back.
That was pretty cool.
And shrugged.
That was so cool.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
So cool.
And they built up. I felt like they earned that. They built that. They were starting to be able to get physical objects back and forth. So I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, that was some of my thoughts. What do you guys think?
Well, one of the things that I liked with, you mentioned Lando coming back, there was, there were different moments where with Luke and then Han and Leia and Lando, it kind of felt like this one generation passing the torch on to the next generation of like this group of people with Rey and Finn and Poe and all the others. And I know the others, I just didn't want to go through the whole process of listing them all. But honestly, my favorite part is the fact that Palpatine was in it. I think he is a super cool villain. I think he is like really legit, and I just loved every scene that he was in.
He was actually pretty spooky.
Right?
Pretty spooky, man. He wasn't missing his fingers. And
He's been in every trilogy now.
yeah,
Yep.
but I like the scene where like the final, obviously this is super spoiler territory, but like the final scene, like he like shoots like the bolt of lightning in like the air and like all
That
it's, like,
was
Yeah,
super
the
cool.
Force storm
It's like
is
the-
just like...
EMP blast like hits all of like their spaceships,
Right.
and everyone's just like falling for the sky, and you're like, okay,
Dude,
well.
and the sound like of that happening, like that sort of Inception blah that happened, where like everything else kind of deafened a little bit, and it was that whole scene
I was very
just gorgeous.
shocked when I saw that.
So Derek, yeah. So I mean, aside from just saying the movie was amazing and I really liked it, specifically, what did I like? So when I talk about The Last Jedi, and I talk about the things that I liked about that movie, sometimes I encounter people who don't want to admit that there was anything worth liking in that movie. But for me, there were scenes here and there. The slow-mo fight with Rey and Kylo going back to back. That was awesome. Like those were sort of piecemeal what I liked about episode 8. The thing that makes me love episode 9 is that it had all of those moments and there was a good cohesive story stringing them together. Right. And so for me, the lightsaber pass was amazing. The I am all the Sith moment with Palpatine, as soon as he said that, I would argue that a lot of people probably expected Rey to pull the I am all the Jedi thing, but that was epic anyway. Like the fact that it came out of her mouth and it was awesome.
And she heard all the Jedi.
And yeah, like the voices and the fact that you actually heard like Ahsoka and you heard Mace Windu and all of these, like it's just so cool. Qui-Gon Jinn was there. And it was like, oh my gosh, I loved it.
Well, his voice was there.
Yeah.
His voice was there.
Apparently they had done like the Force ghost of all of the characters who were there, and then they cut it. At least that's the rumor. So I'm hoping that is true and that we get a director's cut of this movie and it will be even better. So you said 8 out of 10. I would have to give it at least an 8.5, potentially a 9. But I want to leave room for the hope that a director's cut's going to come out that's going to easily be like a 9.5, because I feel like J.J. Abrams hit a home run with this movie, and any kind of that I have about it, I feel like has been explained by things that I've read about maybe editing decisions Disney made. So I don't want to fault Abrams for that.
I think that I would probably give it, I think a 9 out of 10. And I just saw it last night, so I'm still pretty fresh off the bandwagon of it. But it was, what I liked about it was everything in the story, at least for this film, made sense. Like they had great foreshadowing with all the Force powers and how they came in later on. All these things. Like from a structural story standpoint, everything in there worked in this film. Now, if you compare it to the last movie, you say maybe they retconned some stuff. Then I could see that as being an issue for like some people. For me, I kind of viewed this almost as like its own, not necessarily standalone film, but I wasn't comparing it to the last two when I was watching it too much. I really wasn't. I was like, okay, let's just see where the story goes. And I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, it is a long movie. It's like 2 hours and 20 minutes. And I felt moving towards the last act, I was starting to feel some fatigue in it just because I'm like, okay, this is a very long, I mean, I was still engaged, but I'm like, this is a very long movie.
Yeah.
And plot-wise, I've read some reviews. People say it's like a fetch quest from a video game. And I could see why, but I also know when you're doing like a blockbuster movie, and it's an action blockbuster movie, you want a clear, concise plot that the viewer, any viewer kind of pick up and say, I know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
And with this many characters and chess pieces, if they made it too complex, I think it would have been kind of hard to follow. And I think that they learned from The Last Jedi where they can't have some weird side story. Like everything has to tie in to the main thread. So I really enjoyed the Sith in the movie, surprisingly. Usually I'm more of a Jedi guy, but for this one I was like, actually, I think that they had a great new Sith villain. Awesome. Kylo Ren, for me, I think stole the show more than anyone else did. And overall, I thought that their scenes that they played out were all pretty cool, especially Dark Rey. When she like the scary teeth, like she did like the jump scare, and I was like,
she had like her Bilbo Baggins moment from Fellowship of the
and I was thinking the same thing. And I was like, yo, Dark Rey.
Yeah.
She got the
and you mentioned that
Army knife.
the Swiss Army saber with the scary teeth. I think that she probably
it's like a butterfly knife, really. Like not even a Swiss Army knife, because it was just like she like flipped it and it like unlocked. It was like,
I wish that there was more Dark Rey. So.
That was like a Detroit saber. That's what
I'm sorry, Detroit. We love you.
Well, I guess we somewhat love you.
So you mentioned Kylo Ren stole the show. I agree. And even Derek, we've talked about, and I think you mentioned it earlier. Just their arc, Ben and I almost said Daisy, for Daisy Ridley Rey. And for me, one of my favorite scenes and moments was right before Han Solo showed up to speak to Kylo, was that fight, that lightsaber duel between between Rey and Kylo Ren, and seeing her get more and more aggressive. Seeing like when they were fighting, like she started doing some of the more like when Kylo Ren fights with a saber, he's beating you up with a lightsaber, right? Like he's very aggressive, he's very physical. Like he knocks you down with it. You know, it's not just this elegant kind of stuff like you saw in like Duel of the Fates from Phantom Menace. And Rey was sort of using some of those same techniques. She was getting more aggressive. And by the point in the fight where she gets his saber and stabs him with it, it's like she was just full of hate. And like that is a big, to me, positive. It's a compliment to Daisy Ridley's acting that you saw her shift and approach the darkness, right? And what's nice is that wasn't this new crazy weird thing because they addressed that in Last Jedi. You know, when Luke's doing the training moment and he's like, "You went straight to the dark thing," like, you know, and he was mortified by what Rey did in the Force vision on the little island. And so it was tied into this movie in a way that made sense. And then as soon as it was over, she had this moment of clarity where she was horrified herself with what just happened, and then she healed them. And I heard someone describe it online when they were talking about it, their interpretation of that scene, that when she healed him, she healed Ben Solo, and Kylo Ren died. And what's really interesting, that really is the moment right there where she got him with the saber and then healed him. He talks with Han, chucks his saber out, and then from then on, he's Ben Solo again.
Yeah, well, also Leia showed up and just said his name, and like just that love I think he felt for like the first time. I think that's what really shifted him around, because to have the people that he'd be like trade come back and say, "Hey, like we still see the true you," then that's like that was like the cause of his change.
Yeah,
you know, overall.
Well, and that's a really good point. It kind of segues into what we were going to talk about for our faith point, that you know, the lineage that each of them struggled with for very different reasons. So Kylo Ren had two parents who were rebels, one of whom was a Jedi. Yes, Leia was a Jedi. It's canon. It's just not in the movies. And yet he turns to the dark side, whereas Rey is the granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine, right? And she becomes a Jedi under Luke's training. And so by the end of the movie, they're both wrestling with this. Kylo Ren more in the previous movie and the first one where he killed his dad.
Rip.
A little bit more of yeah, go ahead.
I was saying, before we get super deep in that, can we share what we didn't like?
Oh, I thought, well, we already had been. Sure, go ahead.
I haven't.
Derek's like, I hate
Yes, Derek really needs to get this off his chest.
please,
Yeah.
like,
To bring some balance to the Force here. Okay, so here's my issue with Disney and, again, the trilogy. They should have had this planned out, because I felt like there was a good part of 9 that spent correcting the stuff that was found in 8. How they brought Luke Skywalker back to kind of do this thing with the lightsaber, like, you know, you should respect a Jedi's weapon and stuff like that. Some of that stuff was kind of cute, but some of that stuff was like, if you had planned this out, I feel like the series was good. It could have been great. It also, I feel like some of the storylines for some people just kind of ended. I was satisfied with what they gave us, but I thought it could be so much more. For example, I think it was cool that Poe, who I ended up liking more than I thought even would, how he ended up being the general after Leia died. That's really cool. But Finn, what's happening with Finn? You know,
he's also the general as they well.
Is he? Did they say that?
They're
commander.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
did I get that? The part with Lando and the lady who I forget her name now. At the end of the scene, she was like, "I want to find out more about my background." Lando's like, "Hey, why don't we do that?" Like
Was it
people
like
online
Zori?
were like, "What was that?"
Is it Zori?
No, it's the other lady. We have to I forget
Rose?
her name. Nope, not Rose. The lady who used to be First Order.
Her and Finn both connected. She was
okay.
also a
Yes.
stormtrooper. Yeah, and then at the
former
very end of the
stormtrooper.
movie, she wants to find out where she was kidnapped from, and Lando says, "Let's go."
Yes, and a lot of people online were like, was Lando hitting on her? Like, this is awkward. What is this? And you find out through some research that Lando had actually had a child stolen from him by the First Order, and so there's a good chance that this lady's actually his daughter. You know, that makes more sense. Finn, throughout the movie, says several times, "Hey, there's something I want to tell Rey." he never tells her throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, it's just left open.
Yes.
Yeah. John Boyega went so far as to tweet and say, like, no, he wasn't going to tell Rey that he loved her.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, so you know what he was going to say. What was he going to say?
Yeah.
Like,
we will later find out that he was just going to say I'm force sensitive, which makes sense. So doing some research, there's a chance that J.J. Abrams actually had a longer movie, had about a 3-hour cut, but that Disney thought that was too long and then shortened it to 2.5 hours. I'm not sure if that's true, but if that is, it kind of makes a little bit more sense about kind of where some of the storylines ended. And also Rose, who had a big part in episode 2 or episode 8, was almost missing in episode 9. And I think it was kind of sad because some people didn't like Rose's character. And some people are even going after her with the actress with some bad insults, even racial insults, which is horrible. I think it'd be really cool if they had made sure that Rose had a good storyline in episode 9. Some director said they want her to stay at base to help Leia and stuff like that. I just felt like they could have plotted this out a little bit better. So that's my issues with 9. Even though I thought it was good, I thought it could have been great. And I thought where they ended, they had a chance to kind of renew some things, including the Jedi Order, who for a long time didn't allow feelings or marriage. I thought Rey could have kind of redone that as some of the extended universe has done. So again, I thought it was good, but that they could have made a few more choices. And for me, I didn't need Palpatine to be there. It's fine that he was. I didn't need, and to get back to the faith point, we find out that Rey is related to Palpatine, which is fine if that's how they're going to go with that. I thought it was okay if her parents were nobody special, if her parents made the sacrifice to make sure she was safe, if they had, felt that she was force sensitive or whatever. You don't have to be a Jedi or Sith or have all these magical powers to be important in the universe. I thought could have been an even more powerful message. But now that she is related to Palpatine, we can go back to that point about her and Kylo. There you go.
That's fine. That's good. Well, and I mean, just a few things with what you were saying about the Jedi Order. So at the very end of the movie, she goes back and she buries the 2 sabers on where Luke's old water farm was, and she's got a yellow saber now, right? And so the implication is that she built it, which would be the Jedi thing to do. You build your own saber, but they don't outright say it, and they don't tell you where she got it. But we do know that she read all of the books, because Luke had all of them when he was training her in the last movie. So she knows the Jedi code. She knows the history of the Jedi. And the yellow saber is typically used by the guards at the Jedi Temple. And so it could be a little Easter egg for she is going to rebuild the Order, and this is how she's starting, and she's kind of taking up that mantle. It could also be an attempt to sell a new color merchandise. I don't know. I wouldn't put either. I wouldn't put either one past Disney at this point. At the same time, I think there was a very obvious merchandise play, and that is the droid that none of us have talked about, because while he was
Dio.
cute,
no, thank you.
Right?
He was no Baby Yoda. Is what we're trying to say.
No, he was adorable and funny, but also super forgettable.
Well,
unfortunately,
he didn't really have much screen time, and he did play a role in the movie towards the last act, but apart from that, he wasn't.
Was BB hungry?
BB hungry?
No, because BB ate.
As soon as you said that, I knew where you're going. All right, so what's our favorite point, John?
That was almost the joke leading into this episode.
What is the point, John?
So we talked about lineages and everything a minute ago, and how Rey's a Palpatine, Kylo Ren's a Skywalker and a Solo. When Rise of Skywalker was the announced title, my first thought was Kylo Ren is a Skywalker. Because everyone talks about how, he's got the name of his father, because that's how names work typically, and so he is a Solo, but he's also a Skywalker. So I felt like that's what they were getting at, and that really did end up kind of being what they were doing with it, because he had this whole redemptive arc. But there's this constant struggle of who your family expects you to be and what you're born into genetically and who you end up being, and to the point where even at the very end of the movie, the last line of it is Rey saying, Skywalker, referring to her last name. She adopted that name, if you will, which I've heard most people really positive about, some people really negative about. They wish that she had just owned the fact that she was a Palpatine and not let it define her, which I think is I think it's important that we can own our past but not let it define us. That's something that is important for every individual to be able to do. But what I saw in that moment was not her shunning that part of her past and who she is, but in choosing to not let it define her. At the same time, Palpatine doesn't deserve to have his name continue. And that if the Palpatine name dies with Emperor Palpatine, I think that's about what his bloodline deserves, personally. But faith point stuff in 1 Corinthians 6, and then we can kind of chat some about it. 6 verse 11. So in this section of the chapter, Paul is writing about different things that people who have come to Christ shouldn't engage in, things that they shouldn't be a part of. And he ends with this little note where he says, "Some of you were once like that, but you were cleansed. You were made holy. You were made right with God by calling on the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God." So the important part there is you might have, but you don't now. And what you might have done doesn't define who you are now. And so that kind of riles up all these thoughts about the whole arc with Kylo Ren and Rey. So what are y'all's thoughts on that?
I'm reminded of the scripture. I don't remember the reference actually, but when it says that you're made a new creation in Christ, I think of all the people that I know that have had their lives completely transformed by Christ. And I think it's easy for some people to think about the way that that person used to be and think of them through that perspective, but it's important to recognize that change. I've been trying to think about, Ben in the movie and think of him as Ben because he's no longer Kylo. People keep saying like, oh, Kylo and Rey fought together, but it was actually Ben because Kylo was no more and Kylo was transformed into Ben. And just this idea that when we step into what God has for us, when we decide to follow him, we are made new creations in him.
Yeah, that's good.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think another verse that comes to mind that somewhat ties in is like his mercies are new every day. And there's a point where even though we've moved past our old life into Christ, that old habits that can creep up, and sometimes that stuff can really be used to guilt us, to beat us down, to keep us paralyzing in that we can never prove our worth to God. The truth of the matter is you can never do it anyway. You can never prove your worth to God because you don't get saved by your works. You get saved by his grace.
Yeah.
So to know that his mercy, and it was mercy that caused Kylo Ren to change, or Ben, if you want to call him Ben at that point, But the point of the matter is like we see kind of mercy and love being like the core fundamental themes that kind of help these people change. And when you've wronged somebody and they still come back to you and say, "Hey, man, I'm here for you," like that's what God does to us. And the hope is that you can potentially make some friends, or you may have some friends that will do the same thing as well.
I think that's awesome. And again, my favorite part of the movie was
Babu Freak.
Okay, my second favorite part of the movie Kylo/Ben's story arc and Rey's story arc and how they intersected. And we all have the dark side in us. We all have the sin that we struggle with. And it comes to a choice, what are we going to do with it? And just because your family has done something, your parents have done something, the Bible talks a lot about like generational curses that pass through families, and it's people who keep doing the same thing. And we have the opportunity in Christ to break those curses, to say, hey, this stops with me. We're no longer going to do this anymore. And so for Kylo/Ben, for him to make a decision, I don't need to keep giving into the dark side. I can turn to the light. Was really cool. For Rey to struggle, as we all do, with, hey, I want to be light side, but I'm related to this really evil dude. Like, what do I do with that? Again, we all have, maybe stuff in our family that we're not proud of, or even stuff that we've done in our past that we're not proud of. As everyone has just said, that's not the end of our story. We still have a choice to make. And the great thing with God is every day is new with him. And if we just come to God and be like, God, look, this mess is messed up. I don't want to keep doing this anymore. I don't want this in my family anymore. Can you help me? He is always faithful to help us through that. So for me, that is the greatest part of this trilogy. Just because you're related to so-and-so, or just because you've done so-and-so in the past, that doesn't have to be where your story ends. Your story can be new every single day if you choose to make it new, and if you ask God for help.
Yeah.
Awesome.
No, that's great. Like, cut. No, that's really good. I appreciate that. And one of the last things I want to say is talking about the arc between Ben and Rey. I would agree that's my favorite thing between all three movies. And the reason I think that that's the case is they brought back Palpatine. They kept it a secret until the teaser dropped, and you had that little laugh going, and it was just like, this is crazy. And yet, after the movie, even though the Palpatine stuff wasn't bad, it was good, we're talking about Ben and Rey. And that to me shows how well Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver have done in portraying these characters and in these roles. I'm really looking forward to seeing other movies that they've done and that are releasing later this year. Like, if I see them headlining a movie, that's going to be like I'm probably going to check it out. And so thank you guys for coming here. This is sort of the end of an era, right? Like, the Skywalker saga is done. Star Wars is not done. Mandalorian, we've probably already released that episode. You should watch it. But thank you guys for being here. Joel, Hannah, Derek.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Anna.
I said Joel, Hannah. Pray for me.
Pray for him, please.
And thank you for being here. You are the reason that we do what we do. You matter to us and to God. And if you ever question that, just comment first on YouTube. And we'll take care of you. Have a good week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. There's sale at the mall. Everything's half off.
What mall?
Darth Maul.
Ah, you fell right into that, dude.
That was perfect.
Oh.